modern self-esteem, right? We live in kind of an era that's very like self-affirming, right? That I love me. I love me, and the reason why I love me is because I have decided to love me. Right? And oftentimes this is saying, okay, what's really good about me? Right? Loving myself and accepting myself and embracing myself. Now here's the thing, there's some really good aspects of that. Right? To say yourself does matter to God. You're an image bearer of God, but what often happens is that I say, I love me for me, and that is not stable enough to actually carry your identity. And so what happens is modern self-esteem tends to be both super fragile and super rigid. Let me explain. So super fragile, right? So when I say I love me for me, or I am Knuff, if you saw the Barbie movie, right? I am Knuff, right? I am good in and of myself. I say, I declare, I'm good, right? That becomes very fragile because I am deciding, or I am saying, this is my worth. My worth is what I have decided it will be. But the reality is, like, if you actually took an honest look at your life, actually took an honest look at your heart, like, there's some things in you that you're still working out. Like, there's some things in you that aren't great, that aren't enough, that aren't quite, like, good enough. You're not always good. You're not always selfless. You're not always what everyone expects you to be. And so what ends up happening is when modern self-esteem says, I love me for me, I have to present an image of myself that is a little bit better than I actually am, right? So I'm kind of always constantly curating an identity, always presenting a version of myself. I'm always, as Lady Gaga said, I'm always living for the applause. I'm always living for someone to say, yes, you're good, affirming me. And so modern self-esteem becomes very fragile because I can't actually acknowledge the parts of me that aren't great. I don't know how to talk about those parts of me. I don't know how to share about those parts of me. And so I'm always kind of having a little bit of a false self where I'm presenting a version of myself. It's fragile. And you know it's fragile because when someone criticizes you, don't you just fall apart? Like you can have 5 people affirming you and one person criticizing you, and only that one critic matters. And so what ends up happening is modern self-esteem, as it's fragile, it also becomes very rigid. Where when that person criticizes you, or when that group comes against you, or when someone questions you, or maybe some of your dirty laundry starts to come out, right? What happens is we tend to inflate our ego, and we just like cancel people. We just like push people away, right? And so, like, have you ever wondered why we're such like a self-affirming, self-accepting world right now, at the same time that we're just like viciously polarized? It's because our self-esteem is very fragile. And so what happens is when someone is against me or criticizes me, I have to build a big ego and I have to push them away. And so I become very rigid. I become very black and white in my thinking. Like, you're in or you're out. Why? Because I have decided that I love me for me. But that's not how love in the way of Jesus works. You see, it's the same thing. I love myself, but why do I love myself? I love myself not because of me, but because God has loved me. Like, that is the source of love in the way of Jesus. So Christian love is received, and it's received by God's grace, which means that I didn't earn it. I didn't ask God for it. I didn't present my religious resume to God, and he says, you know what? Here's my love stamp. Boom, love. No. Love is given because God is gracious. Now, here's why that matters. That means that I can actually be humble while loving myself. Why? Because by the very nature of receiving it, I didn't earn it. And actually, the received love of God, that it's based on grace, where God paid the price for my sins so that I could know his love, that actually invites me to affirm that I'm not always who I should be. I'm not always as good as I should be. I have warts, I have sin, I have struggle, and I can admit those things because God's love for me is secure. That's right. You see how radical this is, how different this is. When I understand that I love myself, not because I'm great, but because God is great and he is gracious to me, that actually makes me radically humble. Amen. Radically humble in my love for people. And that means that when people are not who they should be, when people are not all that they pretend to be, when people are difficult or hard to love, I don't have to cast them out. because I know that I'm hard to love.
That's right.
I know that I didn't deserve the love that God had for me. And so as I begin to understand that I love myself, not because of me, but because God has loved me, it actually frees me to love in a radically open kind of way.
Thank you, Lord.
Because I know the only reason I'm here is because of God's love.
That's right.
And so the only reason you're here is because of God's love. And so loving myself as God loves me. One of Jesus' closest friends, John, he was in the inner circle of Jesus, and from the moment that he knew Jesus on, his identity was forever changed. If you read about him in the biography that he wrote about Jesus, he called himself the disciple that Jesus loved.
Amen.
How much did he have to have confidence in the love of God? To write in the biography of Jesus that would be recorded for all of human history, you know what, my name is John and I'm the disciple that Jesus loved. And yet you know when you read that, he's not using it as a badge of honor like, and you're not. He's saying, you're the disciple that Jesus loved. That's why he says in 1 John, when he writes the letter to the church, he says, we love because he first loved us. Man, that is a foundation that you can build an identity on.
That's right.
That is a foundation that you can confidently walk through the world and saying, yeah, I'm flawed, but God's love for me is secure. And so I love myself, not because I'm great, but because God was great for me.